Good evening and welcome to the April 18th, 2016 session of the Bellingham City Council. Bellingham City Council meets all requirements of the State of Washington Open Meetings Act. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
April Barker.
Here.
Dan Hamill.
Here.
Gene Knudsen.
Here.
Michael Lillequist.
Here.
Roxanne Murphy.
Here.
Pinky Vargas.
Here.
Terry Borneman.
Here.
Thank you. We are going to proceed to our 15-minute public comment period, and we will be sticking to only 15 minutes today because we have a public hearing. And just as a side note, in this afternoon's committee meeting, we did make a motion in regards to moving public comment period to after public hearings. So after today, that is a procedure that we will move forward with if that does completely pass tonight. Our first name is Yoshi Ravel, and then Christopher Diley.
Oh, gee, you cracked me up.
Hello. Thank you, members of the audience and staff, TV audience, members of the City Council, and Madam Mayor. A company recently announced that they will no longer breed orca whales in captivity, and that any animals that they use in their shows will be rescue and rehabilitation animals. Another major company, in fact one of the largest in the world, recently announced that they will only use cage-free eggs in their stores. Another major company, a fashion company, announced that they will no longer use animal furs in any of their fashions, in any of their clothes. It seems that humanity is gradually seeping into the business world, and I'm grateful for that. And I wonder, what are we doing here in Bellingham, both as a city and individually, to reconnect with our humanity? One of the things that I've done is I've changed to a vegan diet. First of all, because I found that it's a healthier diet. Secondly, a vegan diet is far less damaging to the environment, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and in terms of pollution. Animal agriculture is a major polluter in our country and around the world. Thirdly, I don't like the way animals are treated in our culture. Most of the time they're treated as if they're machines, and we don't afford them the recognition of the fact that they're fellow creatures in our creation, that they deserve rights from us, and that we have a responsibility to be good stewards of the gift that we've been given. And the fact of the matter are, if we are cruel with the animals, we will be cruel with ourselves. We cannot separate the two. In order to regain our humanity, we have to have humanity in our food, and in our businesses, and in our personal lives. And I encourage each of us to think about that this evening. How can we reconnect with our humanity? Thank you, and I wish you all a pleasant evening.
Thank you, Yoshi. Christopher?
Hi, my name is Christopher Bruce Diley, and I'm not trying to be redundant, but just to reiterate for people that might not be aware of the issue, it's regarding the reintroduction of the grizzlies into the Cascades that's currently under proposal. And this is in specific to the public safety issue, whereas the bear spray is not enough to stop a bear. Chris Morgan, the Western Washington University professor of ecology, he's been advising in the past for people to use bear spray for bear attacks. And as some of the city council members know, I was attacked, my friend and I were attacked by a bear in 1996 up in Alaska. So I just want to read this letter because they just had a grizzly attack. There's a story in the Alaska Dispatch News today that shows up online where a man was just recently attacked up in Alaska by a grizzly along the Denali Highway. I tried to post underneath of that story, and my post word disappeared. Some were appearing and some were disappearing. So there's manipulation of the information that's trying to get out to the public on this issue. I can't get my letters published in the Seattle Times or the Bellingham Herald on this issue or any other. So I'm just going to read my letter that was published in the Colorado and very quickly. It's going to be real quick. On September 15th, 1996, I learned the hard way that bear spray is not enough to stop a charging bear. That was in the Anchorage Daily News, a story called "A Can of Spray, A Lot of Luck." That was published September 29th, 1996. Although I sprayed the grizzly in its charge, it knocked me on my butt with a sidearm swipe to my chest, growling and snarling in my face, and according to fishing partner Keith Benner, while it was waving its paw threateningly at my head, I sprayed the rest of the can into its throat since I was the only target available. The bear ran away, I jumped up and made a U-turn and charged again. Out of spray, I resigned myself to being killed, turning my back to the bear so as not to see it get me. Fortunately, it only went around me, knocking Keith against a tree before leaving. Be Bear Aware, a pamphlet endorsed and distributed by the U.S. National Park Service, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, and Department of the Interior, advises bear spray for bear attacks. However, whenever there is a bear attack, wildlife officials respond with firearms, not just bear spray. Moreover, the Anchorage Daily News cited wildlife biologists explaining bear spray does not work on black bears due to a unique protective mucus coating that was in pepper spray Bad Bet in October of 1996. Until an effective non-lethal means of protection against bears becomes available, the public should be aware bear spray is not enough to stop a charging bear. So that's my letter. I'm just trying to get it out to the public just one more time that the bear spray is not enough. And it's just frustrating. I hate coming here and, like I said, being redundant to some people, but I'm being stymied in getting this information out. And all the officials are recommending bear spray when I know I had this real life experience. Bear spray was not enough. So all I can do is just try to do a little bit by showing up and letting people know. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak for public comment? Okay, we're going to close public comment period and move on to our public hearing. In front of us tonight is a consideration of a development agreement between Larrabee Springs, Inc., aka Kitech, and the city regarding Larrabee Springs 429 Unit E8-E9 preliminary plat, aka Larrabee Springs South, located generally at the northern terminus of Cordata Parkway in the Cordata PUD and Area 1 of the Cordata neighborhood. And we are going to start with Alan Mariner from our Deputy Attorney from Legal Department.
Thank you. As you just said, the City Council will consider a development agreement this evening between the city and Larrabee Springs. And I'm going to use, they're also known as Kitech. I'm just used to calling them Kitech, and that's how I'll refer to them. And they own this 429-unit E8, E9 preliminary plat that's located at the northern part of the Cordata PUD, and that is this area labeled and outlined in red up here on the exhibit. Here today for the city are myself from planning director Rick Sepler, senior planner Kathy Bell. Kathy Bell has worked with the Cordata PUD for longer than anyone else with the city. Also here for Public Works is Ted Carlson to answer any questions that may come up regarding transportation issues and street connectors. And then the Kitech has representatives Bob Carmichael, their attorney, and their consultant Darcy Jones. I don't see Mr. Ishii is here. He's vice president of Kitech USA. And they would request that they have an opportunity to comment on the development agreement prior to public testimony. I want to give a brief history of the E89 preliminary plat, just to bring you up to speed. This evening we're focusing on the agreement. This afternoon it was a work session just to discuss generally the transportation issues. D.R. Horton started this preliminary plat by submitting an application, I believe back in 2004, 2005, but it was prior to us adopting our critical areas ordinance in December of 2005, and this plat is vested to our wetland stream ordinance. In 2007, D.R. Horton sued the city over some of the street improvements that the city was requiring them to make. That resulted in a settlement agreement of that lawsuit that was approved by City Council, and it addressed a number of issues for the subdivision, including the construction and phasing of that construction of Klein Road. And Klein Road is the portion that it dealt with is the portion right here that's outlined in red. At the time, as I said this afternoon, the city intended Klein Road to be the east-west connector that's required by the Cordata PUD from all the way from the guide all the way over to, let me get it here, to Northwest. In 2008, the hearing examiner approved the E89 preliminary plat and a phasing plan for construction of the plat. And then during the recession, D.R. Horton got out of Bellingham and they sold all of their holdings, including this property and the entitlement, the preliminary plat approval. And now that property is owned by Kitech. In March of last year, council approved final plat or granted final plat for phase 1. It's actually phase 1A, but it's phase 1 on this overhead. This is the new phasing plan. Approved final plat, and Kitech, that allows Kitech to, it creates the lots, and they are now building homes, and it's my understanding they may have sold some of the homes or at least some of the properties in phase 1. Last spring, Kitech representatives, Mr. Carmichael, Mr. Jones, Mr. Ishii, raised a number of other issues with regards to the E89 preliminary plat. They were basically mainly transportation and phasing issues. And we brought that to council in June of last year, and you directed us to try to work out some kind of agreement to resolve those issues. And that process took a while, but now we're here this evening. The development agreement that you're considering, and we're hoping that you pass the resolution authorizing Mayor Kelly to execute the development agreement, deals with the issues that Kitech has brought to us. And the main issues, the issues are transportation issues. We briefed you on those issues. The big thing standing out there is a pending moratorium on building in the northern part of the Cordata PUD, when total daily trips to that area reach 7,400 trips a day. At that time, there's a moratorium until a traffic study is completed showing what improvements need to be made and an agreement on the developer's financial participation in those improvements. This moratorium would halt Kitech's current development midway through, we believe, phase 1. So if we don't resolve this moratorium before the moratorium kicks in, the development comes to a halt until those things are done. I would also point out that as part of the negotiations, Kitech went ahead and as Mr. Carlson described this afternoon, they went ahead and did that traffic study, and they identified what traffic improvements were needed and what their financial contribution would be to those improvements based on the impact from their E8, E9 plat. The other traffic issue that they raised was they wanted a re-examination of the designation of the east-west connector that's required by the Cordata PUD. And I think there was some confusion. I didn't do a very good job. I think Ted did and Brent Baldwin. But I want to say this is an east-west connector that is required by the Cordata PUD. It is not a regional east-west connector. It is not a citywide east-west connector. It's a connector that we have to, that the PUD calls out within the PUD. So so obviously there are much bigger east-west connector issues for the city and for the region, but this is talking about the PUD, and it's a very specific requirement of the PUD. And as I said, the city previously had identified Klein Road as being the east-west connector. The other issue that they raised was phasing. They requested a modification of their phasing plan. Their phasing plan, I think, had 4 phases. Their new proposed phasing plan is up there. It has 7 phases. And as we discussed this afternoon, Kitech's responsibility for building Klein Road is they need to build it in phases. They need to build each part that abuts the phase that they're seeking final plat approval on. And Councilmember Barker raised the issue, well, what about, what if they never get around to phase 7? And that's a good issue. You're correct. They would never build that portion of Klein Road. The current phasing plan has that as phase 1B. It's the next phase. But that whole issue becomes much less important when Klein Road is no longer the east-west connector. The only reason to build that portion of Klein Road is if there's development along it, because it's not going to go through all the way to the guide meridian because of wetland considerations. The other point that I would stress is that, and I think there's been some public comment to that, is making that portion of the plat phase 7 prolongs the community garden that's located on that. So it's the last phase to be developed, which means obviously it's a Kitech decision, but they don't need that property for development until very late in the project. So after 8 months of negotiations, we've reached an agreement. Took that long. There were a lot of issues. But I want to stress the main points of the development agreement. First, probably most importantly, it enables the city and Kitech to avoid that pending moratorium. That's a big one, both for the city and the uncertainty it creates for both the city and Kitech. Secondly, it identifies Horton Road as the east-west connector for the Cordata PUD. And Ted Carlson explained how we arrived at that decision, that it was more appropriate for the east-west connector to be Horton Road instead of Klein Road. Klein Road within the plat will still be built as each phase is completed. Thirdly, the development agreement requires Kitech to pay $1.5 million towards the construction of Horton Road in 3 installments, and those installments are tied to the phasing plan. So the first installment will be $500,000. That's the installment the city will get and will use to cover some of the cost of it constructing its portion of Horton Road, which is Horton Road from, and I apologize, this overhead isn't a little clear, bigger, but Horton Road from its terminus to Aldridge. So, and that will be paid prior to final plat approval for phase 2 of the plat. So it'll be a payment early on. The other 2 payments are going to go to the county. They total $1 million, and they're going to go during later phases. They're laid out in the development agreement, and those payments will go to the county, and that will go towards their costs of completing Horton Road from Aldridge all the way over to Northwest Drive. And as Mr. Carlson explained, really we have about 1/3 of the costs. They have 2/3 of the cost, roughly, of constructing Horton Road. The development agreement, fourthly, spells out Kitech's responsibility for their off-site transportation improvements, Klein Road and Aldridge Road, the portion of Aldridge Road that abuts the subdivision. Fifthly, it amends Kitech's phasing plan to the phasing plan that's shown above. It's a seven phases. It goes from 4 to 7 phases. And lastly, it provides Kitech the certainty it needs to proceed with its development and to create 429 housing units for the city. I've had several council members ask questions about, this is sort of just jumping in and trying to cut off some of the questions and make sure that the answers are provided up front. Section 5.33, which describes the party's responsibilities if someone files a quiet title action contesting the city's Klein Road right-of-way. And I want to assure council, both the city staff have looked at this issue and Kitech representatives. It came up because there is a fence installed by one of the abutting property owners in the right-of-way. And in an abundance of caution, Kitech requested this procedure for how do we deal with this if it happens. But it is, both sides feel really confident that the city has clear title to the Klein Road right-of-way. The last thing I would say is that the city, as required by the Cordata PUD, and Mr. Carlson mentioned this, had to work in conjunction with the county, and the county had to buy off on both how we're going to do the improvements and what would be Kitech's financial contribution. And there's a letter from John Hutchings to Ted Carlson in your packet that acknowledges that we did that consultation, and they're okay with us moving forward with this development agreement. So the last thing I'll say before we hear from Kitech representatives, I think Bob Carmichael wants to say a few things, is that what we're asking for is just a vote approving the resolution authorizing the mayor to execute the development agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And we'll hold our questions until after Bob and we've had our public comment period. Everyone's good with that? Public hearing? Ooh, visual aids.
Thank you. Good evening. Bob Carmichael, 1700 D Street for Kitech. The first thing I want to do is give a heartfelt thank you to city staff, Mr. Mariner, Planning Director, Public Works Director, Kathy Bell. There's been a lot of hard work put into this over the last many months on both sides, and we recognize that the city has taken this issue and the issues surrounding this very seriously, and we very much appreciate that. It's not to say they weren't difficult negotiations. At times they were, but we got to the end, and that's what counts, at least to bring it to you for your consideration. One of the things I want to emphasize, which you've heard already, but I really want to emphasize, that this development agreement is not a standalone document. The real governing document is the preliminary plat approval for this development. And I don't know, probably 90% of the requirements are all in that agreement. There have been a few modifications, some minor ones in this development agreement, some clarifications, and I would say then sort of three big picture issues, which Alan has already done a great job talking about, so I'm really not going to belabor them except to identify what we see as the big picture issues are resolving the potential moratorium. And that's a huge issue for both us and the city because it's got to be resolved at some point. And I think that was one of the reasons the city put so much time and effort into this. They saw a willing partner, which was us. We came forward, let's try to resolve it. And we worked hard to try to do that. Kitech paid for the traffic study, really an independent traffic study by Transpo, which has often been used by the city. They did a really thorough job and determined what the fair share cost to Kitech would be for this. And that was actually the easiest part of the negotiation, believe it or not. We both said, okay, Transpo said this is what it is. We accept that. The city said we accept that. And we moved on to some of the other smaller issues. The east-west connector is the other second, I'd say the second significant one, just resolving that issue. In a lot of documents over the years, it's been Klein Road. I thought Mr. Carlson did a very thorough job explaining why, in his opinion, Horton Road was the superior alternative, so I'm not even going to try to summarize that because I couldn't do it as well as he did. The third big issue is the change in phasing. It was actually a bit of a disagreement between us and the city whether the hearing examiner actually required a certain order of development. But the city position was it did, and it had to be numerical in accordance with the numbers assigned in the preliminary plat approval. So that got changed, and one of the reasons that is really important is because under the existing preliminary plat approval, Phase 1B would be what's now Phase 7, which is the community garden. And we didn't want to develop the community garden. We don't want to do that now. And we don't know what will happen in the future, but we're actively selling houses right now. Many have sold. I haven't even kept track. Every time we have a meeting, there's several new ones that have sold. So Kitech is selling houses in Phase 1. We are actively working on plans to get Phase 2 approved because we didn't want to develop Phase 1B or now Phase 7 because that would mean the elimination of the garden. We could do it financially. It's financially feasible, but it would mean the elimination of the garden. Kitech, either through me or somebody else, goes to most of those neighborhood association meetings. And it's been very clear to me over the years how important that community garden is to the community. It's always fully subscribed. It's sold out basically every year. And I know they take a lot of pride and a lot of people care a lot about that. And we don't want to disturb that. At least we want to put that off as far as we can. So that to me is one of the other big pluses with this agreement. It's not just a benefit to Kitech to allow us to proceed with the development. It's not just a benefit to the city to resolve what I would say is a thorny issue on the north end, basically once and for all, a couple thorny issues, but it's a benefit to the community to let that garden stay where it is for many years to come. So we would respectfully request that you authorize the mayor to sign this development agreement. I'm here to answer any questions. Darcy Jones, our engineer, is here to answer any questions. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I think we're going to do public comment and then we'll take questions after that. Is everyone okay with that? All right. So anybody who wishes to speak for the public hearing, Michael, could you grab the list for us? And just a reminder, this is the public comment period for the hearing. You have a 3-minute timeline. This is a safe environment for everyone, so no clapping or cheering. We want all opinions to be heard. So the first name is Steve Crooks, and then Charles Silverman.
Mine's on the street.
You know the routine, Steve.
I'm nervous.
Oh, yeah, right.
Good evening. Council members, Mayor Kelly, directors, and fellow Bellingham neighbors. My name is Steve Crooks. I am not here tonight wearing my Bellingham Planning Commissioner's hat, but I am here as a resident of the Cordata neighborhood and newly elected president of the Reserve at Cordata Homeowners Association of 228 home sites directly adjacent to the proposed Phase 7 of the Kitech Developers Agreement now before you. Over the past years, Kitech has been an excellent former owner of our development and now the developer of the new Greenbelt Spring Vista home sites at the northern end of the Cordata Parkway. Kitech has supported our community and our homeowners projects consistently, especially with the dedication of land being used today for our Cordata Community Garden, otherwise known as the best community garden in the city. A little commercial there. After reviewing the proposed development agreement, our Homeowners Association fully supports the approval of this agreement and look forward to the many years ahead with Kitech as our neighbor and an innovative business development leader. I ask for your support in approving this development agreement, good for the neighborhood, good for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Charles Silverman.
Good evening to all of you. My name is Charlie Silverman, and I live on Tremont Avenue, 347. A couple of preliminary things. Number one, I do want to thank the developer for the way they've consistently worked with the neighborhood. They've come, they've talked with us, they've explained what they want to do, and they've been very good to deal with. Number two, I want to thank the folks from the city who have been involved in this these discussions and the work that they've done on this. And the third thing I want to say, I have absolutely no expertise about what I'm going to say at this time. It's just my personal opinion. My concern has to do with traffic. If you take a look at the development as is proposed, and I have no problem with the development at all, no comment at all. My concern is those who are leaving or going into the development from the west, they're going to go out to Aldrich, probably go out to Northwest, and there should be no problem there. I think the idea of having Klein Road going out to the west direction is a great idea. My concern has to do with people leaving and going to the east toward the guide. As a practical matter, right now, what people living there are going to do is they're going to come down Cordata, 1 block, and they're going to turn on to Tremont Avenue. They're not going to go to Horton. They're going to go to Tremont. Now, that's where I live, so I'm an NIMBY. That's what it's all about, right? I live there, and so that's what's going on here. My concern is we have a lot of little children living there. The other problem is the fact that Tremont is a very narrow street. There's parking on one side of the street, and it's difficult for 2 cars going in opposite directions to pass each other. And people speed down there, but that's a common problem everywhere. My concern is that area in Tremont is going to be turned to a very bad situation. And so as you go looking at this, I just ask you to keep in the back of your mind the fact that without Klein Road going all the way through, you're going to have people coming out of that development. There's a lot of people there, and they're going to go right into Tremont. And so I have a concern about that. And I just ask you respectfully, again, I'm not trying to knock anybody who's gotten involved in this thing. It's a good project and all that. This is of concern to me right now. We don't even have those homes and many people coming out of that now, and it's a bad situation. What's going to happen down the line? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Please come forward, Yoshi.
Hello, my name is Yoshi Ravel. Thank you, members of the audience and staff and TV audience, members of the City Council, Madam Mayor. A couple of concerns. There's a tendency to approve of and subsidize more additional automobile traffic and oversized houses over, for instance, walking and bicycling. It's a healthier lifestyle to get out of our cars. And the idea that success is about having lots of toys and big houses is an outdated idea. Success is about health and well-being. And in fact, we're healthier and we're better off having smaller houses and getting out of our cars and walking and bicycling more and getting out in nature more and living more in harmony with nature instead of abusing nature. And I think we need to start questioning this idea of success being more car traffic and bigger houses. I think we actually need to go the opposite way. In fact, if the rest of the world lived like Americans, we would need somewhere between 5 and 6 planet Earths. The math does not work out. Either we start living simpler lives and healthier lives, or nature is going to start taking corrective action. Climate change is one of them. It's going to be ugly. If we don't make the changes, nature is going to make the changes for us in an ugly manner. Thanks you all for listening, and I wish you all a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoshi. Is there anyone else who cares to speak at the public comment? There's a microphone up there if you want to use it, or you're welcome to come downstairs, whatever you would prefer. Yeah, press a button, and if you could just state your name for the record, please.
I'm Alex Weinstra. I'm the builder at Cordata for Kitech and Mr. Ishii. Just to answer Bob's comment earlier, we have 20 sold to date in the last few months. And a little bit of response to the last speaker, they aren't really big homes. They 3 sizes, 1,283 square feet, 1,053 square feet, and 1,567 square feet are the 3 sizes of the 42 units in the current phase. We are doing them built green. We're putting solar panels on every house. It's been quite well received. To the speaker before that commented, we do get a lot of traffic on Tremont. I think Horton Road is intended to be the street that's used with the stoplight. If you go out on Tremont, then you, sometimes a danger to be shooting across the road there. I think I actually wrote a letter to the mayor at one point suggesting they put those barriers in the street like they have down the road in front of Costco that prevent you from turning to the north if you're going out, or to limit the direction of going just to the south if you're leaving, or coming in from the west, just to cut that traffic down, because I don't think Tremont is intended to be the traffic conduit for all the houses going there. Anyway, we are working on plans right now for phase 2, hopefully. That'll be approved and move on this next summer, and we're going to continue doing the built green homes there with the solar panels and everyone too. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Anyone else? Public comment for the hearing, for our public hearing this evening? No? Okay, we're going to close the public hearing portion, and we are going to move on to the council questions and requests. Councilmember Murphy.
Well, I'd just like to start by explaining when I first started as a city council member, I learned about all the issues that were associated with this development and what the city would need to do and what we would need to do to come together with an agreement with the developer. And I didn't know if I would see this day where we would get this development agreement, and I was really worried about that. I hope that our community will start to understand that our county and our city, we're in the middle of a major housing crisis. The reason these homes are selling this quickly is we just don't have enough inventory. At the same time, we really have to meet our Growth Management Act standards. And we have to do that throughout our county, our city, and our state. And so we need these residential units. We need people to be able to buy homes. We want people to live in our community and to support our community and support our businesses. So I am so relieved that we're at this point. I think it's exciting. And that's why I would like to pass the motion to approve the resolution authorizing the mayor into a development agreement with Larrabee Springs in substantially the same exhibit form as Exhibit A to the resolution.
Second. I just have a weird question. Coming from me, it's probably not going to be. E8 and E9, what does that mean? I don't know why I'm even asking it, but
Take a guess.
is that,
There was E1 through 7?
no,
So when Trillium,
no, now you're going way back.
no, it's not way back, but when Trillium did their real estate map, they had areas A, area B, area C, and this happened to be area E. And E was broken up in 1 through 8, and this happened to be, or 9, this happened to be E8, E9.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Councilmember Lillquist.
I have some questions about the agreement. First of all, so this afternoon we heard that the city's portion of the road, about a third of it, costs about a third of the cost, around $5 million, I think I heard. These are rough estimates, of course. And the county's is twice that, about $15 million for the total project. And under this agreement, they'll be paying for about 10% of the cost, which we're told is their fair share. I'm trying to understand what we're changing from the development agreement. Under the proposed agreement, they'd be paying their fair share of their transportation impacts, but under the existing agreement, don't they pay all of the costs of putting in Klein Road, or do they pay a share of Klein Road under the, so they're paying their fair share of Horton, or what are they paying, what share are they paying of Klein Road if we chose it? And staff has said it's not the best option, but what is their share of that less preferred option?
The proponents are paying their fair share. The balance of it is accrued to all of the other development in that project, and funds were never reserved by the structure of the PUD to pay for that. All the pre-existing development that's there has a divided interest based on their proportionate size in these issues.
So you're saying is that the PUD in its entirety is obligated for Klein Road, but this teeny portion was never obligated for the Klein Road, only their
for its
share.
share. Yes,
so
they're
the other
one component part.
9/10,
This goes back, if I might, this goes back to a legacy project the city inherited from the county. And inheriting that, it had a number of challenges that projects of that day typically had. It had its moratoria and its levels and thresholds let the impacts occurred before the funds were reserved for the other improvements that were needed. The challenge for that is the project never matured to what was proposed and considered and approved by the county. The development was never so intense and didn't provide the revenue for it. Absent the developer, who's no longer a party, you're left with folks who have a piece of a project. The proponents are honorable. They're honoring what their fair share would be. However, there's a gap for those other expenditures.
Councilmember Barker.
So having been the president of a neighborhood association for quite a bit of time, I'd like developers to really take an example of Kitech. I think that when they say they've been to every neighborhood association meeting, I show up randomly and they are always there. They really have taken an interest in understanding the neighborhood, showing up at their neighborhood picnics, and I think to this fact, showing a respect of the garden area. And it's this part where as we grow, and we're growing quickly, where neighborhoods and developers can be allies and not adversaries. And so I really do appreciate that. And I know we're going to be looking at other annexation proposals, and you've kind of filled that bucket that I talk about, and I appreciate that from a neighborhood perspective. As far as my question earlier regarding Area 7, which I guess the question would, the timing of development and then the force of development. And the question earlier was, we have several lots, a few lots left in Bellingham, and they're really the most difficult to build. And so that kind of happens because people tend to build the easier, and then maybe they wane off, or for whatever reason. And number 7, if you've been out there, it's pretty wet. I can see why, one, it's because the garden's there, but it also could be difficult to build. So my question, I guess, is I'm not so worried about the road, because the road would go in if there was development, but is there anything in the preliminary plat proposal that will be, I guess it can be approved after if we vote this through, that allows the garden to be there in perpetuity until this area is built?
There is no requirement in the approval specific to the community garden. It's a secondary arrangement between the association or whoever manages it and the proponents. What I can say is we talked just a moment ago about legacy projects and the old way of doing business. At this point, we've designed the phasing so that each phase, should no subsequent phase occur, stands alone. And we never find that issue where we have an unfunded requirement or something that's partially done. That's the new way of doing business. We come forward. In this instance, it's an arrangement that will need to be perfected between the property owner and the group that manages the garden for long-term use.
Thank you.
Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, getting to this point we're at right now of designating Horton Road as the east-west connector within the PUD has been a long process. And I just want to say I'm really glad that we've finally gotten to that point, and I'm really looking forward to this moving forward, because this is a really important connector. That decision to whatever it was going to be, that it's finally decided, and there's plans to put that through. And it's just been a long process, and I'm really glad. So I'll be really glad to support this. Plus, we do. Roxanne's correct. We do need the additional housing stock in the city, and so I will gladly support this tonight.
So I just, for me, my, Kitech has been a very community-conscious developer, and I really want to support responsible housing development in this city, so I'm going to be supporting this motion. Councilmember Lillquist, and then did I miss someone up here?
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Borneman that getting Horton Road to go all the way through is really important. For years, we had June Road dead end. I mean, it was already bulldozed. There was gravel there. There was like this segment of unbuilt road that just stood there forever. It was horrible to see that linger. And actually, it's very relevant to that, because when we finally approved an agreement for a change of circumstances for the development that was connected to that, my speech was the lemonade out of lemons speeches. that what we were agreeing to was not great, but what we inherited, the legacy conditions that you were talking about, Mr. Sepler. I think this is the same thing. I think we're getting someone who is going to pay their share, their 10%. Where is the other share? This thing proceeded without the rest of the development paying its share. My question has to do with, I don't want a June Road type phenomenon. What we heard this afternoon is that I guess again, $15 million project to complete this. And I'm kind of mostly concerned, I guess, about the part out to Aldrich. The whole thing is important. I really want this to go all the way over to Northwest and therefore up to Slater. There was a $4 million grant, I believe, that was secured by the county and the city together, partway toward this $15 million. And what I'm hearing is that $500,000 will be contributed to the city maybe in the next year or two, and then the other $1 million from Larrabee Springs will be over phase 3 and 4. That money will be dribbling in. Well, you can't build a road with dribbling in money. You need to kind of have the money in hand, or at least, figure it out before you build the road. Given the phasing, given the fact we have a $4 million grant, where's the rest of the money coming to, and what is the estimated time frame, assuming that this project is built and assuming that the 1.5 does come in? When might we see Horton Road go through to Aldrich, and when might the county push it through to Northwest? How long will we see a June Road type phenomenon, or can we avoid that lingering quite as long? I guess another way of putting that is, do we have other funds from our current resources that add to that pot already?
Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. The first section, the city's portion of Horton on the current alignment, or the current project that would start at the terminus and head to Aldridge Road, all within the city's portion. That project, as I mentioned this afternoon, is about a $5.5 million project. If we can find, we're about $1 million short. And so what you'll see when we bring forward the proposed 6-year TIP later this year is that staff is recommending in 2017 another $1 million that would come from street fund, so city local money, to make that project whole. It's a project that has a couple different rounds of federal money. We originally secured some federal money for design, and then as I spoke about it in this afternoon session, the county and the city moved forward, and you just mentioned it, Michael, and secured about a $3.5 million, $4 million grant between the two, the county and the city.
3.5 or 4?
Well, it's 4.
Okay.
And the city gets a portion of that, and the county gets a portion of that. And so we don't quite have our project fully funded. The money that the county has, the only money that the county has identified for their phase of Horton Road is the most recent STP money, the federal transportation money, and that's probably enough to do an alignment study and preliminary design. So when will that funding be secured? That's the more challenging question. You're talking about a $15 million project. There's some intersection improvements that will be needed at Northwest and Horton, a roundabout likely. So we certainly recognize that that's a long-term project. It could potentially be funded over the years with additional regional federal money that comes through our COG and is distributed to all the members of the Council of Governments. One thing to remember is once the city's portion is completed and the only remaining section to be built is the county section, and that would complete the alignment all the way over to Northwest, we now have a project that will score much better when we try to find funding through our funding partners. What we've been told in the past is the reason Horton has never done really well outside of STP funding, so Transportation Improvement Board money, is because it's not a full connection, because the city was always submitting just for the city's portion. Took you over to Aldrich, but ultimately we need to get to Northwest so that we can get to that Slater Road interchange. So we don't have a timing when we think we'll have the money for the county. All we can say is that it's on the Council of Government, the regional priority list. The Horton Road was the number 3 project that the policy board voted on for us to continue to try find funding as a region. And so we'll just continue to do that, and hopefully some money will start coming together for that portion. I would like to address just quickly, this afternoon, Councilmember Barker talked about the impacts on Aldrich Road when we make just the connection to Aldrich, and what will that mean in terms of additional traffic on Aldrich heading south as it intersects with Northwest. And it was a good question. I don't think I answered it fully. Certainly, we know that that intersection will not perform as well as we get additional volume on there. I talked about the future construction of Mahogany, as that will provide an east-west from northwest over to Pack Highway and another access to Slater. One thing that would likely happen in the interim period prior to connecting the county's portion of Horton is some turn restriction at that Aldrich Northwest intersection. In fact, that's actually spelled out in the PUD, that would become a right-in, right-out only. That makes that intersection function a little bit better. It would allow you to take a right onto Northwest, go up to the Mahogany alignment, take Mahogany over to the future Arctic, which will have a signal at Bakerview, or all the way over to Pack Highway. So that's an interim step prior to the county's portion being constructed.
Councilmember Murphy.
I just wanted to take a quick time out to sincerely thank all of the city staff that worked on this. I also wanted to thank the developer and everybody who's been working with the developer for everything you've done to work with our community, and then also for the ways you've been willing to work with our staff to get to this development agreement. And I just hope that it will go on to create, I know it's been a long road, but I hope it will go on to create better roads and better homes. So thank you.
Councilmember Barker.
Thank you, Ted, for, I think that's probably a really great resolution. I think getting the information out to the community, there will probably be some frustration, but it really is a safer, and I'm glad that clearly it was spelled out. I think it's hard, and I respect so much because I've testified many, many times in a public hearing, and then nobody really addressed my question. And sometimes, like these things, this is specific to the PUD. So for the Tremont gentleman, I've been on that street, and I could only imagine purchasing a home there with my family, thinking I was just purchasing a single-family home on not a very busy street, and it really has become extremely busy, and it will probably continue. So, and I don't know if it's addressed in the PUD because of the traffic study that was done, but is that also a situation where it might be right in or just right out and no in? I don't know how that would work, but has that been addressed also in the PUD?
The Tremont section was modeled when we looked at the impacts of the Horton alignment and what that would do on the surrounding streets and how we thought the traffic would be distributed along the Cordata area, throughout the Cordata area. The construction of Horton actually shows that over time the Tremont traffic won't increase as much because you'll have the signal at Horton and the Guide Meridian. The gentleman raised a good point. Folks that are wanting to get to the Guide Meridian and are coming from north of the Tremont could potentially take that Tremont. They're doing that now. That is a concern. Folks that have been out there for a while will recall that it used to be turn restricted. You didn't used to be able to take a left out of Tremont or a left in. It had a pork chop there. When the state came in and widened the Guide Meridian and put in the center turn lane, the turn restriction off of Tremont onto the Guide was removed. It's possible, if volumes on Tremont do increase more than we're projecting in the modeling, and it becomes a safety issue, that could be turn restricted again. And I think that's what the gentleman raised. I think that's likely to happen if volumes continue to rise on Tremont. The volumes analysis that we did show that as traffic gets a little bit heavier with development, people are more likely to go to Horton. Now, this is, you never know exactly what's going to happen, but most people will go to the signalized intersection. The other thing about Tremont, it was brought up earlier as well, is it is a little bit narrower. It has on-street parking. That does tend to slow folks a little bit. It makes it feel a little more congested, but it also serves to calm the traffic a bit. It's something we'll have to watch as it develops.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Yes, I want to thank everybody. As Terry said, this has been a long process, but I want to go back to 1994 when I first met people from Kitech. I received a phone call from some guy from Jones Engineering by the name of Pat Jones who said, come on, I want you to meet some people. Back then, Darcy was 15 years old, and Carmichael's beard wasn't so gray, but no, they were great people to work with. They do what they say. They build good developments, and I'm just happy that we've gotten to this point and look forward to the future working with Kitech farther north. Thank you.
Councilmember Lillquist and Barker.
I don't know who can answer this question, unfortunately, because it's a parks question. Maybe Rick, Ted, I don't know. But as I understand it, we have a park right there that we have limited access to, or park land. and it's constrained in how much we can develop that Cordata Park because of Cordata. I mean, because of Horton not going through. Am I correct in that? And how does the development of that park interact with the timing of putting Horton through?
The parkland that you're speaking about you're correct. It's adjacent to the Horton alignment. It does require access off of Horton. So full development of the park has been reliant on constructing Horton, at least constructing it far enough along to the west to serve the parkland. We've always been operating under the premise that we're going to construct that whole section to Aldrich and not try to just build an access to the park. Because of the efficiencies through permitting, it made more sense to build the full connection. So you're right, building Horton will enable the park to develop to whatever extent it's going to develop, and that's as much as I know about it. I'd defer to perhaps the mayor on that.
Kelly knows more. Kelly's the expert today.
Yeah, on everything, right? When the Cordata Park property was bought, this is according to the last two parks directors, neither of whom are here, so I won't, if Leslie was here, I'd have her come up and answer. And I remember the first year I was mayor, I asked Ted, will you punch Horton Road through so we can get a park up at Cordata? And he smiled at me and said, you know, like maybe or something. But we also, I think we because of the previous uncertainty about Horton, we also bought a very accessible parks property that will probably be developed to a higher level of development than the Cordata Meadows project will be. So I think we could have Leslie maybe come and talk about that. But the intent of the Cordata Park off Cordata Parkway is that instead of putting all the resources in the North Park, we'll be using the park that's easily accessible to people.
I think it could turn out really well. The park we're talking about now can be developed to kind of a more natural standard, and the other park, which isn't forested, might host more playground type activities. I guess what I'm trying to do, as I said, I'm making my lemonade out of lemon speech, and this is some of the sugar to me. The fact that this parkland was purchased some years ago, added to a few years after that, and there's limited development. I do think we inherited a mess. You call them legacy projects. It's a really nice word for kind of a raw deal. This development is stepping up. This development is paying its fair share. I see no reason to penalize this development for the legacy we inherited. And I'm seeing some benefits in terms of the parkland, benefits in terms of the transportation. I still would like the east-west connector to the north of this property to go through sometime before I die. But this is good. And I had one more thing I wanted to say, and I've probably forgotten what it is. Thank you.
Okay. So we have a motion in front of us, which has been seconded. The motion is to approve a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a develop agreement with Larrabee Springs in substantially the same amount as Exhibit A to the resolution. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
Madam President?
Yes.
I just remembered. The other bits of sweetener for me is the fact that I'm hearing the development really will be some moderate, potentially affordable, market rate affordable homes. That's really nice. It's not part of the agreement. I'm just glad to hear it.
Okay, do you want to follow up with Ted later on your question? Is that possible?
Since we have the Tremont folks, I know some of them are watching at home, and I just wanted to make it clear, you guys are going to be watching it. Does that mean, do they need to be contacting you as they see traffic increase, or will it be on a timeline that you guys will be monitoring it regularly? How, just so that they know kind of how that's going to work out.
Well, certainly we're always happy to hear from the residents if they see things out there that they don't believe are safe. So I would encourage them to not hesitate to contact us. We'll be watching it. We do periodic traffic counts. We work with WashDOT on all of the access points to the Guide Meridian. So we'd be looking at it, looking to see how it functions during peak time. You know, are you able to safely make a movement out of there? If not, then we'll have to seriously look at restricting the movement. But I would encourage them to contact us if they see things that are unsafe. Yep.
Okay, to reiterate, the motion carried 7-0 for the mayor to authorize into agreement with KITEC. And thank you, Mr. Ishii, for joining us today. Okay. We are going to move on to our regular committee meeting report outs. This morning, we had Public Works, Public Safety, and Terry Borneman is our chair.
Thank you, Pinky. This morning, we had 6 items before the committee. The first item was the City of Bellingham and Fire District 8's contract for service. The City of Bellingham's Fire Department currently provides administrative and fire training services to Fire District Number 8 through an interlocal agreement which began in 2013. There have been ongoing efforts to evaluate full functional consolidation for the benefit of the citizens within the 2 agencies' boundary. Staff provided an update on the progress of these efforts and the basis for a potential full contract with Fire District Number 8. This was for information only. The next item was an ordinance regarding the administration of a donation made for the assistance of the families of firefighters who have lost their lives or been killed, especially in the line of duty. In 2013, City Council adopted ordinance number 2013-10-075 for the purpose of accepting a donation of $37,991.40, which was donated to the city for the purpose of assisting the families of firefighters who have lost their lives or been killed, especially in the line of duty. The same ordinance created the Firefighters Assistance Board to review requests for support. The International Association of Firefighters, IAFF, Local 106, recently created the Bellingham/Whatcom Firefighters Benevolent Foundation, a 501c3, whose purpose includes the distribution of funds for the benefit of families of firefighters who have lost their lives or been disabled. The committee recommended approval, and I so move.
Second. We have a motion in front of us. Any discussion? No? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
Then we had a couple items relating to solid waste today. The first was a residential solid waste collection update. In January 2015, the city renewed its contract with Sanitation Services, SSC, for the collection and hauling of residential waste. The contract anticipates 2 changes in services offered by SSC in the support of the community's goal to reduce energy consumption and climate impact. Specifically, the contract refers to the conversion of the truck fleet from diesel to compressed natural gas and expansion of the Food Plus services. Staff provided a brief overview of the changes being planned and anticipated impacts to the rate for residential solid waste collection. We had a really good discussion on this today. The conversion plan is something that's already been decided on, and it looks like when it's completed, there could be up to a 25% reduction in emissions from switching from diesel. But the Food Plus hasn't been decided yet, and we had a pretty good discussion about this, looking at whether to make this mandatory. On the surface, if you just make it mandatory, it sounds okay, but we're looking at an increase in rates for individuals to be able to do this from $5 to $8 a month, which, again, on the surface, for some people, $5 doesn't sound much. Right now, it costs $8 for Food Plus. It said, if we do it in volume, maybe we can reduce it for those that already have it, but we will charge everybody else $5 a month. But when your budget is such that at the end of the month you have to start making decisions about which bills you're going to pay, because there is no extra money. $5 a month is a lot. And we've been, we've seen water rates going up and a lot of other rates going up. So we had a pretty good discussion about that in terms of looking at that. And it's something that the council as a whole, as we go forward, will have a decision to make about that, because it hasn't been decided yet. And so I believe that will be coming back for further discussions in the future as to, do we want to make everybody pay that rate, whether they're using it or not? Because there are some people, and myself included, who work really hard to compost and reuse almost everything in terms of, for gardens and other kinds of things. And the yard waste, to haul. So, Michael.
Yeah, Terry, I unfortunately was not here. Was there some discussion that by implementing Food Plus, which might be an increase, that there might be a decrease in the general waste charge? I mean, I know I have basically 3 containers, my recycling, my compost, and my garbage, and I barely fill up my garbage anymore. And where I live, we have cut our garbage collection number of containers way down. So if it's revenue neutral, then I think it's not a burden. You're right, if it's not revenue neutral. Was that discussed? I didn't
No, it was discussed, because for some people, yes, you might be able to get a decrease, but for others who are already have reduced their waste so that it is once a month or once every 3 weeks, you're already down there, and it's going to be an increase. But Ted?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would agree with Councilmember Borneman. We had a really productive discussion this morning, exactly what we were looking for from council, some direction on how to maybe bring this back for a broader discussion in the context of the city's budget. So that's what we'll be doing. And we'll provide a little bit more information on the entire recycling and solid waste bill and opportunities for either reduction in frequency or reduction in the size of the container, and how that may be able to offset some of the costs. But as Councilmember Borneman offered, some people are already on the very lowest level of service, monthly pickup with a smaller container, and they wouldn't have many options in that regard. But we will package up some information, bring it back as part of, like I said, that bigger discussion, and there was no need to make a decision today or in the near term. We had at the earliest planned on perhaps a 2017 change in service, so there's some time to have that discussion. And I would add briefly that in 2015 there was a fairly significant increase in the subscribers to Food Plus, just on a voluntary basis. I don't have the numbers of subscribers, but I do know that the total tonnage of the organics went up about 10%. So more people using it, more volume going into the Food Plus program, which is a good thing, and we can continue to have discussions moving forward.
Yeah, I did almost forget about that. That one point was that the mayor had asked, instead of making a decision on the Food Plus now in isolation, that we do look at it in terms of some of the other issues, the cumulative effect, and so that will be part of that. So that was the end of that report. The next was, again, solid waste, and this was the solid waste disposal contract update. Through a series of agreements, lawsuits, and settlements dating back to the 1980s, the city designated Republic Services, aka Recomp, as the designation for all residential solid waste collections for sanitation service company, SSC. The disposal agreement expires in 2016. Staff recommends that a request for proposal, an RFP, be issued for a competitive process to select a preferred service provider for disposals of residential solid waste. Staff provided background information and described the draft RFP. Council input and direction was desired on the selection criteria proposal in the RFP. Again, we had very good discussion on this, and with this, the current draft, we're looking at a weighted proposal for an RFP, looking at qualifications, operational, financial, and service fees. And basically, the items that we kind of discussed most has to do with the operational, which looks at some of the issues related to greenhouse gas emissions reductions, the carbon footprint in hauling waste to the landfill. You know, does it make, such as the difference between hauling with trains or hauling with trucks? With trains, the discussion went, it does cut back on emissions with this, and it also removes those added trucks from already congested highways, and how much do we weight that, as opposed to also looking at, again, that discussion about fees. How much do we weight towards the cost, and how much for the environmental part? What we had asked is that we bring that we set this over and have another discussion to give the public and council members more time to weigh in, as well as providers and things to weigh in on this proposal before we make that those recommendations to the full council. And does that sound about right? Yeah, it was a really good discussion today. This was a productive committee this morning. It went long, but it was very productive. The next item was the Transportation Committee update and work plan review. Jim McCabe, the president of the commission, presented the 2015 annual report and provided an update on the 2016 work plan. It was a good report. They're doing good work, and a lot of it. And you know, this was for information. This was for information only. And again, I think everybody on the committee did thank the commission, and especially Jim. Jim's been doing this from the beginning for the hard work that this commission puts in on this. It's a lot of work, and for high pay. Yeah. And so we did want them to know that we really appreciate the hard work that they put into this. The last item was water treatment plant pre-treatment project update. The water treatment plant pre-treatment project is currently in the design phase at approximately 90% completion. Included in the scope is the pre-treatment system and the conversion of the disinfection system from chlorine gas to sodium hydrochloride. The project will help control disinfection by byproducts present in the drinking water and maintain the high quality and safe drinking water expected by the community. The project is within the budget and with applied contingencies. The project includes a 1% for the arts provision. The project will be issued for public bidding in May of 2016, with the construction starting September 2016. Staff provided a brief presentation, and this was for information only. So,
yeah, I want to thank Council Member Barker for taking my place this morning. Maybe that's why I was so productive. So.
Yeah, well, yes, and yes, she did a good job standing in for you, Gene. You would have been proud. End of committee report.
Thank you, Terry. We're going to move into what our afternoon sessions were for Committee of the Whole. The first one being a briefing on the transportation issues in the Cordata PUD. This was a preliminary discussion for us presented by Deputy Attorney Alan Mariner on the public hearing that we had tonight, so discussion on the moratorium and the connectors, et cetera, and it was a preview to our public hearing. The second item was a discussion on the Whatcom County Emergency Medical System EMS funding work group recommendation. This was a follow-up to the April 11th presentation by Chief Newbold, and we did come through that with a motion. The motion was to direct staff to prepare a resolution in support of the EMS working group recommendation, including putting the levy on the ballot for the 2016 general election, and the committee did recommend approval. And I so move.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? We have passed the EMS preparation for the resolution. 7-0. The third item in front of us today was a presentation by Seth Fleetwood, who is the chair of the Greenways 4 levy. We had a very healthy discussion, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the things that came out in the presentations for the Greenways 4 levy. One thing that Seth did share with us was that this is a little bit different in regards to many of the levies around Greenway have been based around acquisition and taking into consideration all of the things that our parks needed and where we are as a city, that the Greenways 4 committee proposes in their recommendation that 42% of the project development be, 42% be for project development, 31 for acquisition, 17 for maintenance of parks and trails, and 10% for greenways preservation and endowment. Their presentation included a recommendation and proposed a 50 cent for each $1,000 of assessed property value, a 10-year levy, and the following guidelines for use of new levy funds. This was a great presentation, and we had a very healthy discussion. We also had a previous presentation this weekend on level of service, and one of the things that we were discussing was a metropolitan park district. So some of those comments today were on how those would either overlap, interact, or just the discovery of exactly what that means for the city and what that would mean for our parks. So we asked for a presentation by the city staff on May 2nd about the Metropolitan Park District, and for us to revisit the Greenways levy proposal on May 16th. Is there anything else that, okay, so, and that was again for information only today. We have one set of minutes to approve. They are for April.
We do not have any
Oh,
minutes.
we don't. I'm looking at the wrong one. Well, oops. Oopsie.
Next.
Okay. So we are going to go to older new business. And the first item on that is I wanted to do a little recap. The City Council had a retreat this weekend, and we wanted to just share with you some of the outcomes and some of the things that we learned this weekend. And the first thing, actually, Rick Sepler, if you wouldn't mind, if you could come down here. So we, our retreat was facilitated by Mary Dumas, who led us through an icebreaker about civility and democracy. And then the next item, we had a presentation on the level of service discussion by Rick Sepler and all the department heads. And we have a motion to discuss this evening, but before we do, we thought it would be quite helpful for the public to see what we were actually presented on Saturday, so you are all aware of what we are proposing to move forward on. And again, these are just proposed strategies for us to discover and investigate what that would look like in improving our level of service.
I'm going to ask Elizabeth to help me call this up. We're providing right now, circulating to you, are materials you saw originally on Saturday with some minor updates. I'd like to go over the updates, and we'll put it on the overhead so folks can see it or screen. I'm not able to get it to call up. Oh, that's why.
Here, is it the matrix?
Let's start with the goals. Those are the goals, and I'll call the other one up. Okay. And Members of the council, we've provided you copies of this document, but for the community members present, just a bit of background. The department head team has been working with the mayor and the mayor's office to look for long-term sustainability strategies. These strategies are to ensure that we can continue to deliver the services Bellingham values into the future. We're faced with a number of challenges, as are many governments. Council will recall that our expenses increase greater than our revenues, and that in about 2 or 3 years, barring some significant change, those lines will cross and we'll be faced with very hard choices. Towards that end, the goal, as we've articulated, is to find a solution set of strategies that protect the community and allow us to continue in service delivery. We're at the beginning of that journey, and none of the materials that are provided to you are definitive. They are not advocating one or the other. However, we have looked through a range of approaches that were identified in prior studies, and those approaches resonate, and some have been selected for further discussion, review, and to discuss the potential of its applicability for the community. In selecting those strategies, there were 2 sets of goals and guiding principles that were used, and we've made 2 additions to them. Clearly, the goals are to ensure that the things we must provide are provided to protect the public health, safety, and welfare, that things that are valued by the quality of life of the community are maintained, to acknowledge that there's a significant change after the Great Recession and we need to be responsive to it. Government will change, and we could either go along kicking and screaming, or we could find a way of adapting to that change. We could develop collaborative and cost-effective intergovernmental and private sector solutions to address some of the issues we face. And we could recognize the commitment that my colleagues at the city employees in general, make to our community. And we want to acknowledge their role and avoid impacting them during short and long-term financial discussions. Based on discussion, we've added a new goal, and that is to evaluate our adopted levels of service to ensure that the measures used match our desired outcome. And that would be something we'll do as part of the comprehensive plan process. We'll look at all the existing ones and saying, is this the metric we need to measure, are we getting what we want, and are there economies by changing that number? In terms of guiding principles, we had a number that are still valid, clear and understandable strategies that are both financially and politically feasible. We didn't want to sacrifice the long-term interest for any short-term gain. We're in it for the long haul as the community. We wanted to consider big ideas that may change the structure of how we provide services. And we wanted to make sure that we communicated with both internal and external stakeholders, and that's the community too. We've added yet another good guiding principle that needs to be assessed for every strategy we look at, and that is to consider the cumulative effect of on our low-income residents from the multiple proposals that increase taxes and fees. Many of the things that are on our list are regressive in nature, borne most greatly by the people who could least afford it, and we need to be mindful of that as we go forward in whatever blend that would be. To the greatest extent possible, we want to avoid those regressive funding models. So those are the revised, based on your comments, goals and policies. We'll keep those handy because they're the metric we'll use to evaluate the strategies when we bring them forward. And now on to the strategies. I hope that's still readable for most folks. I'm old and I could read it. If not, I can see if I can enlarge it a little bit. Better? A little better? Okay. I'm going to cover by title only and just call out the specific revisions for you. Again, as you recall, the checkbox signifies that it's a recommendation by administration. The checks are on this side right there. As we look at the proposals before you, the first is to investigate a regional fire authority. We've added in the far right column the type. This would be a levy, and it basically allows consolidation of fire services between our department and at least one other district. Could be more than one district. And it talks about the time of those as 1 to 2 years for the RFA preparation for the plan, and 1 to 2 years subsequent to that for consideration by the public. Metropolitan Parks District was discussed at length today. We're going to be coming back to you shortly with sort of a fact pattern and a better understanding of how it nests with potential potential levy requests, and if that's a possibility, if MPDs do bonds or levies, and how that would work. Just a correction, all of us looked and misread the greater than and less than, and we have corrected it. It's less than 2 years because no plan needs to be prepared. Okay, sorry for the error on that. The library annexation was added. Again, it's a levy. That's a check based on comments that were received at the meeting. Strategies that at this point are not to be directly investigated but are kept in the queue pending the outcome of the first go-round include a levy lid lift with could be a single or multiple year. It could be specific to an issue or group of issues, nothing identified. The public safety tax, the coordination with Whatcom County on a countywide strategy for funding, it may be for joint programs. Again, nothing proposed at this point. We've noted each type unknown at that point for the Whatcom County, sales tax for 1% and how that would work. Department of Administrative Services, again, in operational efficiency. It's not a revenue source, but it may make us more nimble. One that is recommended is to continue the entrepreneurial shift in museum, Mount Baker Theater, and sport governance. It's organizational efficiency. It may result in higher user fees or in alternative funding sources or some combination of thereof. But that's kind of the way you look at it, and you investigate how best to make it sustainable for each of those models. Increase utility tax on honestly operated utilities. Again, that's a tax as noted in the far right column. Reduce the complexity of civil service would have some return, but largely deals with organizational efficiency. Going to the medium lift, none recommended there. Reducing the overall city level of service by levying new hires. That again is organizational efficiency. There are some cost savings because as demand increases, you're staying flat with your service provision. 2 taxes, ambulance utility not recommended at this time, and a utility tax increase not recommended at this time. There are a number of ongoing efforts that are recommended and will continue, one of which is to reduce the park's level of service, and to consider that's council directed, and also to consider increased operational support in future green and levies. As you heard this afternoon, the initial proposal does reflect that, of having greater operational support. Emergency medical services levy, again, a matter before council. This is one that is a levy. Council is poised to act. I don't need to go too more further in it, other than the fact that it does have significant benefit to the community as a whole and to the city specifically in terms of sustainability. To use lean management practices, again, something we're ongoing. It's an operational efficiency approach. We think we can do more with less. The Center for Excellence of Grants and Contract Management, operational efficiency. We think we might be able to avoid redundancy. And finally, identification of potential surplus properties. Again, this is warranted by the BMC, and it basically would allow for new revenue, though short duration as you sell properties that are no longer needed for any public purpose. That's the summary of the changes. It's reflective of your direction, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on the changes themselves.
Councilmember Lillquist.
I don't have a question. I just have a praise. I think that the goal and the principle you added did reflect some of the comments. I think too often when we talk about this level of service, it's cutting service, increasing taxes. It's all about quantity as opposed to, say, the quality and the change. And I'm interested in reforming and reshaping our finances as much as just increasing or lowering. And so the equity issue is important for me. The kind of goal-directed policiness is important. I know equity is important to some other city council members as well. I think you reflected that very well. Thank you.
Councilmember Hamel.
Just to add to that, I think that we have an opportunity here to create a really good Band-Aid, or we have an opportunity to create a long-term sustainable budget that includes equity and fairness for our citizens. So I want to praise the administration for putting together and the department heads for the time that was invested in this, because I do think that we can get to that longer term sustainable solution, and it will be some mixture of these items that are brought forward.
Councilmember Barker, and just as a reminder, this is just a recap of the retreat.
I just, page 5 on the ongoing efforts, and maybe I didn't catch this at the retreat, but the reducing parks level of service, that's an ongoing effort. I know we talked about possibly looking at different ways to measure that it's coming to the outcome. Is this, since it's in the capital facilities, is this maybe reducing the mowing and things, or is this?
This was a direction from council. Council requested that we look, as part of the comp plan, to look at level of service and make sure we're getting what we wanted from it. Sort of ties into Councilmember Lilliquist's approach to some degree, also ties into ensuring that it was proportionate to our needs. A good example might be is if we're not going to annex a portion, for example, of a UGA, it reduces the number of park acres that are required. You know, we want to be mindful on that.
Yeah, suggestion, maybe reevaluate the parks level of service. I think just seeing that reduced level of service is a little, was I here?
No, you were not,
okay.
but I think it was to look to
Fully
reduce it
makes sense.
or to change it. And perhaps as a clarification, it's to revise it would be better than reducing.
Councilmember Lilliquist.
Yeah, Councilmember Barker, the current draft parks plan does actually reduce the overall goal, but the hope would be to not just reduce the number, but actually redirect it so it still increased the level in some areas of the city where it's needed. So overall, it's maybe a reduction, but it would still be an increase, hopefully, in terms of our community goals. That'd be the golden result.
And just to reiterate that we are not deciding anything. We are going to have plenty of opportunity to ask and delve very deeply into all of these proposals that are in front of us today, and so will the public. And with that, I'd like to make a motion to direct the administration to further investigate and develop the selected strategies that are contained in the proposed strategies administration recommendation as presented this evening.
Second.
Any discussion? No? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Okay, a couple more items on the retreat. Things that might be of significance to the public. One of the things that we talked about is regarding the timing of packets. We discussed that very thoroughly, and we realized that the timeline will remain the same. However, staff will we had a discussion about content and materials, et cetera, that staff will try to insert a summary when all materials are not yet available for the packet, so that the council members have an opportunity to review as much as they can in advance. We also talked about moving the 15-minute public comment period to after public hearings, and again, this is not eliminating the public comment. I've heard some concern about that. We are not doing that just when there are public hearings, and Jean made a motion to that this afternoon, and the committee recommended 7-0 to pass that motion.
6-1.
Sorry, 6-1. I apologize, Michael. That is correct. So actually, that motion, do I have a copy of that motion in front of us? I'm going to try and...
Excuse me, I think we need to make the motion again.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm looking for. I'm like, I don't have that motion written down.
I'll
so,
restate
Jean,
it.
maybe if you could restate that motion.
I move that we move the 50-minute public comment period after the public hearings when it's in the packet. So it'll say Pledge of Allegiance, roll call, public hearing, 50-minute public comment period.
And I believe you also added after presentation.
Oh, after presentations too, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we're passed unanimously. April, was there something?
I thought we discussed after that point.
That was discussed.
discussion.
That, are we good to proceed? Okay, so that motion passes 7-0. Another thing we talked about was moving the agenda item to committee of the whole. We discussed that as a council and decided that it is best to be left where it is. Yes, we have some challenges with our SIRE, et cetera, but they may improve over time, but the system itself, we're going to leave the way it works right now. We also had a little discussion on general principles, code of ethics, and dais neutrality, and so we had, I thought, was a really great, productive, and sunny day discussion at our retreat. And if there's anybody who would like to add anything else on that, go ahead, Councilmember Hamel.
As relates to keeping items within the committees, the staff did inform us that there would be an improvement later in the year with the technology where the gap would be is not as big in terms of the time in between committees, so that should be mitigated later this year.
Okay. And does anyone else have anything for old or new business? Councilmember Barker.
Oh, I just wanted to thank you and Marie for all the work. I found my first retreat very educational and fruitful, and I also wanted to thank staff for providing a very neutral space. And what I was a little anxious stepping into a level of service discussion in a room with everybody, and it felt very comfortable, and it didn't feel like anybody was coming in with decisions made, and I think that's really important. And so I just really appreciate that, and looking forward to further discussion. So thank you for all that you did to organize that.
Anyone else on the retreat? No? I too wanted to thank our assistant, Marie Marchand, for all the work she did, and also for all the city staff who put together all materials and worked together on the retreat. So you gave up your Saturday as well, and we do appreciate your participation in our retreat. So thank you for that. Anything else for old or new business? Okay, so I have a report on our executive session. We had an executive session this afternoon. We had a potential property acquisition. Staff provided information on a potential property acquisition, direction given, no action taken. We had potential litigation discussion. Staff provided information on a potential litigation matter, direction given, no action taken. And we are going to move to Mayor's report. Mayor Kelly.
Thank you very much. I do have two appointments tonight. One is Carla Stellwagen, Carla Stellwagen and Kevin Probasco to MNAC, Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Commission. That's for information only. I have two comments to make, and then there's the information I said I'd give you about how we're going through the homeless camp cleanups and what projects are on our project list that we are addressing right now. First of all, thank you, Council, for your attention and the serious way you're approaching the level of service. This is something that I think will be very beneficial to us in the long run, even though it's kind of hard in the short run. And I really think the questions you've been asking and the comments you've been making have been very helpful. So thank you very much. Secondly, thank you for approving the development out at Kitech. There are over 400 families who are going to thank you for supporting moderately sized, moderately priced green build homes. And I say it that way because that's what the outcome of this is, regardless of all the ups and downs and concerns here and there. Our community needs housing, and we don't need great big houses. I agree with Yoshi. But these aren't great big houses. And what they do is they also free up other houses for other families to move into. And so I'm very pleased that the discussion and the vote went the way they did. So thank you very much. Okay, the city's response to homelessness, and this is, I made it really short, nice, simple, so we didn't get into too many pages. If you look at the ongoing projects that we're working on, I mean, there's quite a list. I actually added one to the list, and Rick, you can tell me if it's appropriate. We have been working on a broad, low barrier shelter with a partner operator that will be available to everyone. And so we'll be able to bring you some information about that, hopefully when we find a location. We don't have a location yet. Secondly, there was a meeting with the faith-based community. They had come to my office, some of them, to ask what they could do. And in many communities, it's not the silver bullet, answer, but it is something we can do that will allow services to be available when the city can't be paying for something. Brian Heinrich and I had a very successful trip to Olympia, and what it resulted in is being one of 4 projects in the capital budget for $6 million that dealt with youth homelessness, which was a priority of the legislature this year. And that's the 22 North site. It's associated with the Northwest Youth Services. The reason the project was successful is that they'd done everything. They'd applied to the Housing Authority. They'd applied for our own housing levy. They'd done everything that they were supposed to do. And that just shows that sometimes things are just opportunistic. The best laid plans don't always work out, but this was one of our priority projects. The one I added was one that Rhiannon Bardsley, who's the director there, had talked to me about, and that was potentially some kind of a shelter for 18 to 24-year-olds. There are a lot of they're not students anymore. There are a lot of young people that are camping behind Northwest Youth Services, and they were looking for a facility where they could house people on a transitional basis because the 22 North project will not be built for how long? For 3 years. So she wanted to be able to kind of piggyback on this idea that having some shelter for a shorter period of time would be important. You all know about D.V. Sass and Lydia Place in the Birchwood neighborhood. Very pleased about that. And then Lydia Place also working on an expansion where their original housing was. Of course, we all celebrated the Aloha Motel, and that's moving forward. And then on the site of the old Wilson Motors is the Eleanor Senior Housing Project. The other thing that we've been able to do, and the council has been very open to this, is looking at the money we have from the housing levy, which comes with little restriction, except that if we want to change the apportionment of what we're spending the money on, we need to come council, and we need to have a very good reason why. What we have found with the facilities is we need services to make the facilities work. So the HOT team, the community paramedic, of course the homeless service center is an ongoing asset we have in our community. And then the homeless camp cleanup is what Terry brought forward today. So the homeless camp report, I gave you kind of the where we were, where we went, and where we're going now. So this is where we're going now. So we need to be made aware of any camp locations. So Terry, if you have specific ones, any of our constituents have anything, they need to let us know so that we can pass that on to the police. The police is going to be compiling the list of campsites. We won't be able to clean up everything immediately. I think we were doing 15 a week. I mean, we were up to 15 a week, and we probably can't keep up that level of cleanup, but we're going to make sure that the campsite's visited by police, parks, and public works, depending on the location, and there's an assessment made. Are people living here or not? You know, if it's an unused camp, can we clean it up quickly? And, you know, if it's a facility that's being used by people, can we pull the hot team in? I mean, we're going to have strategies for that. But basically, we're still going to give a 5-day grace period for the hot team to visit. And if there are beds available, that will be a time when the hot team can try to match up people in the camps with beds that are available. Hopefully with the projects that we're working on, there will start being beds available for people. And I'm very hopeful for that. And then we have a designated lead from Parks, Public Works, and Police, and they will be coordinating the effort. And Liz, my assistant, who used to work in Parks, is very familiar with the cleanup program. And so she's going to kind of serve as the administrative lead with those departments so that we have one place where all the information is getting assembled. And right now, the completed project we have, obviously, is Francis Place with 40 beds. And I'm thrilled that that project is done and that it has supportive services for people in our community that need it. And I can only say that we need a few more now because 40 is great, but it barely, you know, nicks the, what? Not enough. I guess that's a small dent. So anyway, if you have any questions either now or if you'd like us to bring back progress reports to you as we're moving through this list of projects, we're happy to do that. And we're getting ready to disperse funds again. So the other thing is that the housing levy lasts 7 years. Was that it? And we want to make sure that this has been very important revenue for the city. I don't know what we would do if we didn't have that revenue. And I've talked to Dan about it and some of the others of you. I think it's really important to start a discussion about the framing of the housing levy sooner rather than later to make sure that we're prioritizing the most important things. And for me, some of those things are the things that can't wait. And we have a lot of things that can't wait. So we'll be bringing forward a recommendation of how we see we might proceed with that. And then there'll be some conversation about who should be included and what our goals are and all that kind of stuff that we'll work with the council. So with that, I'm done.
Councilmember Hamel, did you have your hand up?
I did. Thank you, Mayor, for your report tonight. I did want to acknowledge the importance of that 5-day grace period for the homeless outreach team to visit those sites and work with the occupants to try to find some type of solution for folks that are just kind of in the worst place where, you know, in their lives. And I just wanted to thank the mayor and her team for prioritizing that and seeing that as a value of our community, that we don't want people displaced, but we also want to work to clean up the camps, but we want to provide for a solution for that. So thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, I agree mostly with what you say about the 5-day grace period, because I think in most cases that is important, except when it comes to pitching tents in our parks, of saying it's okay to pitch a tent in the park and you got 5 days that you can pitch tents and it's fine because we're not going to do anything for those 5 days. And I think that does not set really good policy in terms of that. In some of the areas, the regular camps, I understand that, but basically that's what this one says, that in Marine Heritage, if you go, you know, pitch a tent in the park, we're not going to disturb you for 5 days. And I don't think that's a good policy. I do really have problems with that part of it. The rest of this I really think is really good, and I really appreciate this information. But that one part of it, you know, go down the boulevard, pitch a tent, that's okay for 5 days?
Well,
I think I don't agree with that.
The city ordinance says there's no sleeping in parks, correct? So we could enforce the existing city law if the council directs us to. The only reason I'm a little reluctant, Terry, is because it's just passing people off to another place. But that is existing city law right now. So the council might want to have a discussion about that, and obviously we'll proceed with what the council says. And I did not mention everyone I should have mentioned on who we're working with. And on the 22 North side, we're working with the Opportunity Council and Greg Winter too. And I just want to make sure that everyone knew that these are all partnerships.
Okay. Council members Barker and then Hamel.
So this actually just came up in our Parks and Recreation Board committee, and the question that I was asking the group is the systemic issues are causing this increase in homelessness, and I know we're going to do the best that we possibly can, and I really appreciate the thoroughness of the plan that you've made and asking for the patience in the community, and we need that. However, we understand from other people's discoveries that there are a percentage of people who just aren't going to accept those services, which is unfortunate, and that is part of the systemic issue in how we've kind of developed this society. However, that's going to happen. So my question was to that board is, I really wanted some feedback, and what are some basic policies that we could set along with not camping in parks, in riparian areas, areas that we might post where really sensitive areas, along waterways, especially along, like, say, Squalicum Creek, where we're putting lots and lots of money and effort into, so that we know that's a great direction to send possible camp cleanups that it sounds like are going to be going on for a while, versus just who gets upset the quickest and wants that camp cleaned up because it's near their area. I didn't get a lot of feedback. It was a big confusing discussion. So I don't know if, playing my new card, if it would work for, if somebody, maybe Terry, would want to do a work group with me and Mark and come up with some ideas of policy that we could maybe put through that could direct a cleanup on where those spaces are that we're really going to enforce. It's unfortunate it's this situation, but we also don't need to do millions of dollars worth of riparian work, and those waterways are super important to our future. I know it's a very delicate and upsetting thing, but would that be helpful?
Well, I think that what we should probably do is present to you what we are doing, because there was the questions that came up are the citizens' complaints. I mean, aside from where people are going to be, the citizens' complaints and protection of the environment. Now, does one of those come before the other? That's the staff discussion we're having right now. So why don't we present something to you, and if you have some suggestions or you want to have your own work group or whatever, that's great, but you shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel too. So why don't we give you some more detailed information about the staff group that is working on this, so that you know that those are all considerations that we have. And this is kind of evolving because it is so complex. It's not simple. I wish it was simple. But that's one reason why I have been pushing so long for the low barrier shelter. Because if you don't want people to be in the riparian zones and you don't want them to be in the parks, those are two completely priority places where people go. And then you're going to have people in someone's backyard or whatever, and then that's going to cause the same kind of complaints, I think, that Terry raised for a different reason. It's not the parks then, it's the neighborhood. So the sooner we have some transitional place for people to be, I am going to feel much better moving people away from all the places that we don't think is appropriate. But if you guys want to have the discussion about moving people out before 5 days, if they're in a park or whatever, we'll bring some information back from our discussion, and you can have that discussion amongst yourselves.
Okay, so to recap, Mayor, the staff is going to bring forward a presentation more in depth on our homeless our plan to reduce homelessness?
Basically, I was just responding to April's concern about what is the criteria
Oh,
we're
the criteria,
using.
okay.
Yeah. So we're going to, I think it'd be helpful for us if we updated you as, maybe once a month or however long, often, as if something is happening, that would be good for you to be able to talk to your constituents about and for you to know. So, but this, I think this is a little more limited discussion about criteria. Does that sound appropriate?
Yes.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Well, it's sort of an interesting conversation, kind of the loose end of our council meeting, but I think it's actually really productive. I think the administration, Mayor Kelly, is in an impossible place. We have two imperatives, and they're both true, and they both need to be upheld. We cannot allow the breaking of rules in ways that destroy our parklands, ruin our waterways. On the other hand, it makes no sense and produces no good results to kick homeless people out of a camp when they still need a place to sleep the next night, and they're going to find a place, and it's probably going to be in the woods again. So there is no simple answer. It isn't that you should pick one of these imperatives versus the other imperative. We need to pick both. And achieving both of those is very difficult. We see the multi-prongs up here hitting at different levels and in different ways. I do think it's a long-term and complex conversation. I think that we need to have our own little discussions as well as hearing from the administration about the various ways they're trying to tackle this. But it's not going to be simple, and it's not going to be decided by coming down on one side or the other. At least I wouldn't want to come down and wholly on one side or wholly on the other.
Okay, let's move to anything else, Mayor Linville. I want to make sure you're okay. All right, thank you very much. So consent agenda.
Move approval. Oh, it's a tie. Tie goes to the younger.
So the other one gets the second? All right. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda carries 7-0. Final consideration of ordinances.
Agenda Bill 21203, an ordinance amending the 2015-2016 biennial budget, reclassifying one dispatch fund position in the Bellingham Police Department Whatcom Dispatch Group, where no additional appropriation or reallocation of funds is requested.
Move third and final.
Second.
Gene Knutson?
Aye.
Michael Lillquist?
Aye.
Roxanne Murphy?
Aye.
Pinky Vargas?
Aye.
April Barker?
Aye.
Terry Borneman?
Aye.
Dan Hamel?
Aye.
Ordinance passes 7-0.
Thank you. The next meeting of Bellingham City Council will be May 2nd. Thank you all for joining us. Till next time, we are adjourned.